This week, we welcome Igor Volovich, VP of Compliance Strategy for Cyber Compliance at Qmulos, to discuss the convergence of security, compliance, and risk. In our second segment, we'll cover this week's leadership and communications articles. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Panoptica, Cisco's cloud application security solution, provides end-to-end lifecycle protection for cloud-native application environments. It empowers organizations to safeguard their APIs, serverless functions, containers, and Kubernetes environments. Panoptica ensures comprehensive cloud security, compliance, and monitoring at scale, offering deep visibility, contextual risk assessments, and actionable remediation insights for all your cloud assets. Get more information at securityweekly.com/Panoptica. Let's talk about something that's becoming increasingly important for enterprise companies worldwide: cyber risk management. Traditionally, cyber risk has been managed manually in silos, separate from the business's core operations. The future is about getting real-time risk insights benchmarked against your industry peers through automation. And CyberSaint's CyberStrong platform is leading the charge. CyberStrong is not just another point solution. It's a revolutionary platform. It's a quantified top-down risk approach where your unique cyber risks inform C-suite decision-making to identify your top 5 cyber risks and the controls to mitigate them. Sign up for your free cyber risk analysis by visiting securityweekly.com/CyberSaint.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode 340, recorded Monday, March 4th, 2024. I'm Adrian Sanabria, standing in for Matt Alderman, and joining me today is Mr. Jason Albuquerque. How you doing, Jason?
What's going on, Adrian? How are you? Good to see you. Been a while.
It's good to see you. Well,
yeah, man. It's a balmy 57 degrees in New England. I was actually in shorts at a New England Revolution soccer game yesterday. So, yeah, it's happy Springs here finally.
There it is. I was wondering, how we were going to talk about football now that we're post Super Bowl, but there you just handed it to me.
Different
Soccer,
different football,
different football.
That's right.
Football.
That's right.
Yeah. But So I missed you this Christmas. I couldn't come up for the annual holiday get together in studio because I happen to be in Italy. But hopefully be able to see you maybe at RSA or some other event.
Yeah, that'd be great. Love to see you in person, man.
Also joining us, Mr. Ben Carr. How you doing, Ben?
Good, Adrian. How you doing today? It's nice 83 degrees down here in Austin, so a little bit warmer than Jason's temp. Yeah, we've flown right into late spring already. So yeah, but good to see you, and hope to I hope to sync up with you as well, maybe at RSA. So yeah, it'd be good to see you in person.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, we call this first spring here in Tennessee because we usually have a cold snap in early March. So all the flowers will come out, all the pollen starts invading our sinuses, and then everything gets down well below freezing for a couple days or even a week sometimes. And then we have second spring after that. So yeah, I'm somewhere in between. I'm in Knoxville right now, but I split my time between here and Orlando. So my body never knows what's going on.
It's been a super mild spring for us here. It's we'll see what happens. Every now and then we have a late freeze in March, and I'm hoping that doesn't happen this year. But
yeah, everybody's hoping the same here. So we'll see. Quick announcement: Security Weekly listeners can save $100 on their RSA Conference 2024 full conference pass. RSA Conference will take place May 6th through May 9th in San Francisco and on demand. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC24 and use the code 54U SEC Weekly. That's 54U SEC Weekly. We hope to see you there. I don't know about Matt, but I'll definitely be there. Security Weekly will be there, and Broadcast Alley will be doing interviews and stuff like that, like we do every year. And I am very much looking forward to it this year. All right, for our topic today, we have as I mentioned in the intro, the convergence of security, compliance, and risk with Mr. Igor Volovich. And Igor has over 20 years of cybersecurity leadership experience, currently serves as the Vice President of Compliance Strategy at Qmulos, after previously holding CISO roles at Invensys and Schneider Electric. Most recently, Igor leveraged his expertise as an advisor to the CISO at the United States Postal Service. Very interesting role there. Very interesting company there. Maybe we'll get to ask some questions about that. He hosts a popular compliance therapy podcast, which you'll see as soon as we switch to his video. If you're watching the video version of this podcast, he's really leaning into, and I love it. And he's also co-authored the upcoming book, Dear CISO, Notes from the Battlefield. Igor, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, love the whole look there with the background and the lab coat. That's great.
Welcome to Compliance Therapy.
It's great. Yeah, so I mean, very interesting background. Schneider Electric. I assume somewhat different from other CISO roles, being very device and OT heavy company, versus United States Postal Service. I can't imagine being a fly on that wall, and just the scale of everything that they have to deal with must be massive.
It is indeed, right? And so Schneider Electric was unique in a way that it was one of the top 5 firms dealing with OT and electrical distribution and transmission and power management across the world in about 140 countries, where we had boots on the ground. We had, I think, pre-merger, we had somewhere around 140,000 people. And then after the merger that I came in through as the CISO in Invensys, we wound up with somewhere around 185,000 personnel. Again, same countries. It was a very synergistic merger, so we had a lot of complementary, not a lot of overlap, right? So, Invensys came in on the OT side, Schneider Electric came in on the distribution and power management side. And so we could basically take over an entire plant, or let's say an oil field, and provide power, manage efficiency for power, and then at the same time manage all the OT devices. Now, you would think that Postal Service would be completely different, but actually Postal is half OT, because Postal runs 340 distribution centers, and that's where they manage the mail, the packages, the flats, as they call them, which is like magazines. And these are plants. Well, in intents and purposes, the industrial plants occupying somewhere around 2 city blocks, and there's 340 of them. So you've got a lot of OT to manage, and I think somewhere on the order of close to 2 million IP addresses. And like I said, half of it is OT and half of it is IT, and then you've got a lot of mobile stuff. So it's a complex environment to manage, and so you need a lot of strategy, you need a lot of risk management capability to truly put your hands around it.
Yeah, I imagine you don't get that level of scale without, by doing everything manually, right? So, I imagine they have a lot of automation there.
Oh, yeah, of course you have to, right? So, Postal suffered a breach back in 2014, of course, very public, as anything that has to do with Postal, because it is, after all, a public entity. Although, sometimes they'll wake up and say, today we're commercial and tomorrow we're quasi-governmental, but for all intents and purposes, it is very much a government agency. And so you have a lot of different frameworks, a lot of different requirements, a lot of different mandates. You have the Inspector General who comes down and does what they will call performance audits. So things get complicated. So after the 2014 breach, they invested a lot of money. They brought a lot of folks from the industry to help them out. And I think at some point they wound up with close to 400 folks in their security apparatus, and spending somewhere around $150, $160 million a year on cybersecurity alone.
Oh, wow. Very interesting. And, so for today's topic, obviously those are both companies that have to deal with compliance and regulations at a pretty deep level. And I think we hear a lot in the industry talked about, kind of the separation between security and IT, and the gulf there that exists, and, how we're kind of getting those two groups back talking to each other, but also we shouldn't forget, the gulf that has been created between compliance and security. I think everybody's heard or uttered the phrase that compliance is not security. And, even if it's just in people's heads, that separation kind of gets in there. And I can totally see how, you're viewing this as therapy, and how that really connects with a lot of people, because it's, probably some animosity between the groups there. Compliance asking for things to be done that folks don't see any reduction of risk from. And some frustration between the groups, right? Group that is struggling to prevent the next attack from occurring and succeeding, while at the same time they have to make this other group happy that wants them to do things that aren't really going to go, at least in their minds, much towards preventing that next attack. So some frustration coming out of that. So how do you, as a cyber therapist, between the compliance folks and security folks, how do you broach this sensitive topic? How do you get them talking to each other again?
Yeah, it's a funny thing, right? So we've had these premises, we've built these ideas around what compliance is and what security is, and so when people say compliance is not security, I love hearing that, because then I get to pause and ask them the question, why? And more often than not, I don't get an answer. People just kind of love to throw that off the cuff and, like to sound smart in meetings and go, well, this isn't compliance, or this is security, this is not compliance. These are different things. And the real answer to why they're not the same is we have to go back a little bit in time, right? I mean, the first code of compliance was written back in, the days of Hammurabi. So we're talking about 3,700 years ago. And when you think about that tablet, those stone tablets with the cuneiform on it, that was the original code of compliance, right? We looked at that and said, okay, if you build a building and it collapses, then the architect is going to be he's going to face repercussions. So it's very much kind of a deterrent-based model based on retribution and attribution of risk. We haven't really changed things, which is scary to think about that. And despite all the technological innovation that we've had in the last, let's say 100 years, right? With the advent of microprocessors and transistors, et cetera, right? The electronic revolution has not really done anything to spur on innovation in the compliance field. We still look at questionnaires, we still look at opinions. When you consider how compliance actually works and has been structured to work, we borrow a lot of things from the accounting industry, right? So you look at past events, you look at controls, you try to imagine what could have happened, you try to predict risk, but by and large, you're kind of drawing a chalk outline around a body that's already there, right? You're catching things after the fact. And of course, again, it's meant to deter, it's meant to prevent future effects, but really by focusing on past historical events. And of course, in cybersecurity, we operate with real-time data. So in cybersecurity operations, we expect things to happen in real time. We even try to get predictive and proactive with things like threat intelligence, trying to see things as they come around the corner or show up on the horizon. So where did we miss the boat? Where did all that innovation that happened in cybersecurity did not touch compliance? And the main reason is we just never framed the conversation about compliance as a true vehicle for proactive risk management, which is what it's meant to be. All those standards, all those controls, they're really controls against what? Threats, right? So these are threat patterns that we've codified and said these are control patterns, right? So we call them frameworks, we call them standards, we call them mandates, but they're meant to protect against those kinds of threats. The only real reason, coming back to the original question, why compliance is not security, is because it doesn't operate on the same time scale. So security operates in real time and even tries to reach into the future. Compliance operates on history. So if you go to a library and you look at compliance reports versus security reports, compliance tends to be in the fiction section and historical fiction section, right? Because most of the stuff is opinion-based. It's based on some story somebody told you about a control state, and it doesn't necessarily encompass the real posture of the organization. So that's the real reason why compliance is not security.
Igor, I love the fact that you hit on that, right? Because oftentimes I'll say compliance should be a byproduct of strong and proven security, right? Strong security, proven security. Most times you're looking at these compliance, either questionnaires or audits, and they're very point in time, very reactive, extremely slow, and they're not artifact driven. So my question is today's audit process good enough? I don't think it is.
No. I'll just say it right off the bat. No, it's not. I think we've constrained ourselves to this idea that, audit is fine, compliance is fine, that the way things work is fine, that we can have a 3-year trail on, like federal compliance, right? Authorities to operate. You have a 3-year trail. I mean, I have clients right now that look at their environment. They split it into thirds, and they'll do 1/3 1 year, second year, third year, right? Because they simply don't have the bandwidth. And frankly, there is no expectation that they do it real time. So nobody's asking for real-time compliance. At least they haven't up until now. So with the mandates that are coming out of the Executive Order 14028, and for those who are here in DC, that's something you talk about every day. I was at a conference last week, actually, here in DC, that focused a lot on these kinds of mandates and the legal aspects of compliance, and I'll talk more about it as we have this conversation down the line. But so 14028 birthed some things like M2209, which is the zero trust mandate, and also the M2231. So that's sorry, M2131. So that's the one that says you have to have real-time logging. So we get into real-time logging, real-time monitoring, and at that point, it's a very small step to actually full-blown continuous control monitoring. Again, when you hear control monitoring, you're thinking about the financial industry. You're thinking about banks. You're thinking about anti-fraud, anti-money laundering, that kind of stuff, right? But when you apply to the cybersecurity arena, you actually are getting visibility to your existing controls across the entire IT estate in real time. And there's absolutely no reason why we couldn't do it, right? We've artificially constrained ourselves to these historical perspectives, but we have the data, we have the technology, we have the means of doing it in real time, or at least near real time, and we could converge on those timescales. And when I talk about convergence of compliance, security, and risk, what I'm really talking about is converging on A, the idea that it can actually be done on the same timescale, B, converging on the fact that these are the same data sets. So when I talk to folks about it and I present them this idea, there's a lot of resistance because they think, well, kind of the legacy GRC model is, well, we'll stand up this new platform, we'll collect the artifacts or the evidence into it, and then we'll have our own set of dashboards, our own set of workflows, our own set of procedures, and our own set of skill sets that we're going to have to teach people to do. And my answer to that is absolutely not, right? You already have the data. We can just take that data and we can leverage it for compliance use cases, and you don't have to do a lot. It's an incremental investment with exponential output. Mm-hmm. But again, it's a lot of this shifting of the mindsets, and that's why I'm wearing a lab coat, and that's why we call it compliance therapy, because we really got to get people to rethink and reframe and really understand the art of the possible when it comes to compliance automation.
Yeah, and ultimately.
Oh, God, Jason, finish your thought.
No. I was just going to say, ultimately, those are all of the issues we're looking to solve. Speed, right? And then having the true artifacts versus someone's opinion or answers on a questionnaire, and then having that true visibility into where your environment is, so that way you can make quick remediations and or adjustments, right? And I'm assuming that real-time information will also allow, if you have the right system, you can have things like transfer of risk and some type of policy controls in place so that you can actually audit what you're doing in certain places. So, you can handle both the technical side and the administrative side of it.
Indeed, right. And the opportunity there is, basically my mantra is automate what's automatable. Mm-hmm. And if you can show me within your IT estate all the technical controls that could be and should be automated, we can then tell you how many of these are still outstanding, how many of these are actually onboarded into the automated system. So really, compliance automation is a measure of maturity, and also gives you kind of a milepost, right? It gives you an ability to measure your current maturity and something to aspire to, right? Because if we can get to every technical control being automated, being absorbed in real time, all that data driving really good intelligence about your actual risk posture, right? So at this point, we've kind of cognitively converged on the idea of risk and compliance being kind of the same thing, which they always have been, except again, we did this artificial divorce back in the day. And then at that point, you realize, well, I can make decisions proactively. I can figure out what controls are failing as they're failing. I don't have to wait for the next audit cycle. I don't have to wait for the next assessment. I don't have to wait, to pay some Big Four firm to come in and tell me what's going on based on the data that somebody in my department is telling me, right? So Eric Weinstein, the celebrated physicist and thinker, he said something on the podcast recently, and I really like the way he encapsulated. He called these owned problems, right? So when you have somebody who owns a problem, meaning they own the entire problem space and they own the outcomes, they own the funding that goes to that space, they're not necessarily interested in solving the problem, right? They're kind of inherently interested in perpetuating the problem. With that also comes some inherent conflicts of interest. So we have things in our compliance frameworks and mandates and even in laws that says the person who are operating controls should not be the same people who are auditing the control. But when you kind of peel back the onion on how we actually do audit, we're asking the people who own the controls, right? Firewalls, intrusion detection system, et cetera, what have you, right? Endpoint systems. Somebody administers these. This is who the auditors go to ask them of their opinion. So at this point, we have a second person asking the first person of the opinion of the system within their control, and hopefully we're validating those inputs. But the reality is We can't touch all the controls. We can't talk to everybody. And audits are scoped, right? So when you look at all the disclaimers and all the scopes that are applied to the controls, you're looking at a subset of a subset of a subset of everything that's within that environment. So your view of risk is really a keyhole into the larger environment. And so you're trying to extrapolate. You're trying to create this proxy idea of what the risk posture is across the board based on a sampling, hopefully a representative sampling, which we know it's not, of the controls you can actually see within that time-boxed exercise that we call audit or an assessment run. So this entire thing is fundamentally, structurally inefficient, insufficient, and really not capable of capturing the true risk posture, or God forbid, even trying to map some kind of a maturity model for how you're going to elevate it, mature it, and improve it over time.
Yeah, but doesn't that go down? I mean, even deeper than that. Like, why is that the case? Like, it's almost a human nature thing, right? Like when we look at it, when we look at compliance and why we're doing compliance, it's trying to assure that we're doing everything we should be doing. But at the end of the day, a lot of the CISOs I know, a lot of the discussions I've participated in have been an issue around, funding or not having the approval to do things. Like it's a limitation on the control, and so it's always almost a fight between security and audit to try to limit the scope and make sure that you can really focus on showing the things that you are doing. It's not really an effort to determine, are we doing things right? It's a passing attempt at that at best. Like I've never seen an attempt where we're really trying to get at the core problem and trying to solve it, and then coming up with solutions together in a joint effort. I mean, it's the nature of the beast. It pits security against the audit side, against compliance, against executive leadership. It's a challenge.
Well, it's an inherently adversarial model, right? And of course, if we're dealing with the conflict of interest issue, which is, it is an inherent problem in audit, of course, you do want it adversarial. You don't want it to be the same people. You don't want them to collaborate, quote unquote, too tightly, because you're not trying to, the objective is not to try to get past the gauntlet, get that stamp of approval and move on. The objective is to really use compliance for what it's meant to be used, which is manage risk. So if you apply it that way, right, and it sounds like, semantics, but it's not, right? If you actually look at your compliance program as a way to manage risk proactively, and to ensure transparency and accountability across your entire IT estate, then you ask different kinds of questions, and the way you engage with auditors and compliance professionals becomes different. And the way you ensure that transparency, it stops being a manual-based model, and you want to be as automated as possible, because automation equals transparency, because you're asking the controls themselves. You're not depending on somebody's opinion. And of course, now we're stacking these Russian nesting dolls of opinions, and no matter how high we stack them, it's still opinions, right? It's kind of that scene from The Big Short, right? They stack up those bonds, and they become somehow better because we stacked them high enough. It doesn't work that way in compliance. In fact, I have a Jenga set that I actually built that says opinion on every piece, and when you stack it up, and actually says opinion across the side, because it's still opinions, right? So we have to understand the current compliance model, the way that we've accepted these inherent problems, these structural issues. That's the problematic issue, right? That is that's the thing that we have to solve. And again, that's why I wear the lab coat and talk to people about, these flowery ideas, these nebulous ideas about, reframe, rethink, reposition your compliance program. Get away from this divorce, this siloed notion of compliance and security being separate things. Asking the hard questions. How do we know what we know about our IT state? How do we know what we know about our risk posture? And if somebody pulls out the last audit report and says, well, this is where we were a year ago, great. What about the bad guys? Do you think they're looking at your audit report from a year ago, or do you think they're actually looking at your environment today, right? I like to say things like the breach is the ultimate audit, right? Think about that, right? So some of these cognitive, ideas that need to be coupled to the existing thinking in cybersecurity risk management, using compliance, you're already doing it, right? I mean, what people don't understand is they're spending sometimes upward of 65, 70% of their security program actually doing compliance work. When you think about all the hours that are spent on all the audits, all the assessments, all the touches they have to do on their environment, all the hours that are spent talking to administrators about, send me screenshots, let me see if you're actually using these controls. The unfortunate thing that we don't like to talk about in security, which is half the stuff that you buy becomes shelfware and the other half is misconfigured, right? Every audit, every False Claims Act case that I've been seeing, I mean, somebody just filed a case. Actually, I just met this attorney last week in DC. She just filed a case against Georgia Tech, another False Claims Act case. They had labs that were doing DoD research, as any research institution is going to do. basically had a disagreement with their internal security team. They knew that things were out of whack, yet they kept passing compliance checks, and at some point that becomes a federal crime. And so, where do you think compliance fits in your overall organization? Right? If this is a separate silent function, it's purely a paper exercise. Great. Somebody's going to call you on it, and it's either going to be an angry regulator, which we're seeing more and more from the SEC and FTC side. DOJ is filing cases, right? Or it's going to be a hacker, right? And hackers don't care about check bosses, and the breach is the ultimate audit. So think about that, right? So do you want to get there first? Do you want to understand your compliance posture, meaning risk posture, meaning your control posture, right? Do you want to find those vulnerabilities proactively and treat them? So we'd never think about having a severity one vulnerability that sits out there for a year. Right, you get a vulnerability scan, you get a pen test, you see something that's missing, you want to close that off, right? Because that is an exposure vector. Well, we don't think of these things in compliance, right? We think of it, oh, well, we'll file a POAM, a plan of action and milestones. We'll close it, 2 years from now. I just talked to somebody in the federal environment that has had a POAM open for 21 years. 21 years, and they've just kicked that can down the road. So if you start understanding that compliance failures are what we call findings or control findings, they're risks, right? They're not a paper problem. They're an actual problem. These are problems they're waiting to get exploited. So when you understand that, when you kind of get away from this divorce, right? You get the couple back together, security, compliance, and all of them living under the umbrella of risk. That's what this is all about, right? This is not about doing paper faster. This is about reframing how we think about compliance overall.
And Igor, the pressure is on these days, right? So, everything from cybersecurity, privacy law, SEC, and I love the fact that you say that breach is the ultimate audit, because once something happens within your organization, and then there's that legal liability, and you have something like the federal government coming after you, a state government coming after you, that is going to be the most invasive assessment that you've ever seen in your life. Not to mention the legal liability, right? Because if you're going down and you're actually filling out these forms, and you're misleading your clients or misleading investors in the way you're filling out these compliance reports, you're going to be legally liable for that as a CFO, as a CISO, as an executive within an organization. And the pressure is just mounting. So, I think it behooves of all of us to go down the path and start building that bridge between security and compliance, and see how we can be doing things better, more efficiently, more effectively, and get that collaborative environment together, because the pressure is absolutely on.
100%. Let me add another scary thought here: insurability. So again, at the conference, I just went to top 50 chief counsel, cyber counsel from some of the biggest companies, right? And representing law firms, partners from law firms with the legal background, with the government backgrounds, enforcement backgrounds, folks from the SEC. We actually had the chief of the cyber enforcement division at the SEC and the chief of the cyber division at the FBI. So the assistant director of the FBI for cyber. Both presented at the conference. And even though they wanted to kind of tamp down some of the expectations that, we're going to have another SolarWinds, we're going to have more CISOs being charged individually, like in the SolarWinds case, even though they're trying to kind of get people to ease up a little bit about those worries, the reality is, and I polled everybody in the room that I talked to, they kind of chuckled at that and said, you know what? Yeah, they're saying it, but guess what? There's an avalanche of cases coming. So we're seeing, as I mentioned, false claims acts, and if folks don't know what false claim act is, it's basically if you're billing the U.S. government for something, you make representations on their contract, you're supposed to perform. So if you say we are NIST 800-171 compliant, or CMMC 2.0 compliant coming soon, by October 2025, if you're doing defense contracts, and there are somewhere from 80,000 to 300,000 firms, we don't even know what the number is today, right? Doing some level of defense contracting that they possess, confidential and classified, so CUI or CUI, right? People say CUI kind of as a joke, but it's CUI and FCI, federal contract information. So you're holding unclassified data that is still controlled. You're supposed to be CMMC 2.0 compliant. If you're not certified by October 2025, you can't even bid on these contracts. So folks will start seeing the rollout of this. So it's not, hey, we got to have this, and if we don't, maybe we'll get a pass, maybe we'll get a POAM, maybe we'll kick that can down the road for a little bit. Absolutely not. 180 days to close all POAMs, right? Otherwise, your contract is null and void. If you are not certified, you can't bid. So you basically are talking about revenue impacting activities, right? Compliance is actually becoming, and I know it's going to sound a little scary and weird, but it's becoming a matter of competitive advantage. If you can get there faster, if you can demonstrate compliance faster, if you can, A, get there, B, demonstrably present a case that you are actually compliant and have full transparency, full accountability, because ultimately you got to remember, somebody's going to have to sign off on these controls. And it's not going to be, Joe or Jenny somewhere, buried down in the org. It's going to be your CFO and the CEO. And increasingly, they're coming after CISO, right, in the SolarWinds case. So you've got, it's a conflagration of things. And as you said, the pressure is on. Let me add another one, insurability. If you're in the commercial sector, you simply cannot do business if you can't carry insurance. And the insurance companies are not throwing these little questionnaires, they call them, the underwriting applications, right? They used to throw these, 50, 60 questionnaires, and then you fill them out to the best of your ability. Very binary. Do we have MFA? Yes, no. Do we have incident response plan? Yes, no, right? They don't care about that anymore. They want to dig in. They want to see your compliance reports. They want to see your audit reports. They want to get to full transparency because they need to understand the risk that they're insuring. The previously used model for insurability was they look at their loss data, their claims data basically, and then they try to make an actuarial table out of that. They want increasingly more and more what they have with the auto insurance. Basically, you have telematics in your car, right? Like Progressive, Geico, and other companies where you can put the box in your ODB2 port, and they see your driving patterns. They can actually insure your risk and price it correctly. You can get a discount because they know exactly what you're doing. They don't have to extrapolate based on some risk model. Well, that's what the insurance companies are increasingly looking for. And when I asked them, point blank, I said, if you could get access to this data, would you want it? They said, absolutely. And the companies that can come to me today, potential insurers, come to me and present a good case for why I should insure them. This isn't a matter of getting a better price. This is a matter of being able to obtain a policy in the first place. We're talking about Lloyd's of London having to underwrite this kind of stuff, right? Ransomware, a lot of companies are exiting that business. You can't even get ransomware insurance. The market has sort of stabilized again, but you've seen some big cases. Companies try to use an acts of war exception to get out of paying because they said, well, this is collateral damage from the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So all of this calls for transparency and accountability. And if you can demonstrate that, if you can use your compliance program for that, and get to this continuously operating compliance model, right? Basically compliance operations, if you want to call it that. But ultimately, you want to be able to answer for, as I like to say, from the data center to the 10K, right? If you're filing those annual reports, how do you get to that, every pixel on the dashboard? If you cannot answer for that, why is it red, green, yellow, or blank, right? Then you got a problem. And the regulators, again, they're asking more and more for you to justify every one of those settings. So that's the world we're living in now.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, Igor, but yeah, I just wanted to thank you for that and point folks to your podcast over at if you go to Qmulos and click resources. Compliance therapy blog is right there. I assume people can go to podcast players and places like that and also find it.
Absolutely. Yep. We're everywhere.
Excellent stuff. And yeah, I wish we could go longer. I had some thoughts on, I used to be a PCI QSA and I love the idea of automating as much as possible so that we've got time for some of these deeper debates on how to make sure security outcomes and compliance outcomes are aligned. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on Business Security Weekly today. This is great.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Right, and stick around. We'll be back in a few minutes with some leadership and communications articles.